The cafe was quiet, the kind of quiet that made every breath feel too loud. Mira Kapoor sat with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, the warmth doing nothing to ease the chill in her chest. She was a woman who had once been sure of everything, her career as a fashion designer, her marriage, her choices. But now? Now she was just a woman with a secret too heavy to carry alone. She took a slow breath, her fingers trembling as she finally began to speak. "My name is Mira Kapoor," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And this is the story of how my husband's silence destroyed me before it saved me." The memories rushed in like a flood. Just a week ago, her life had been ordinary in the best way. She and Arjun had been married for 5 years, their love steady, comfortable. He was the kind of man who remembered the little things, the way she took her tea, the book she'd been meaning to read, the songs she hummed when she thought no one was listening. She had taken that love for granted. Then Rohan had come back into her life. It had started innocently enough, a message, a casual catch-up over coffee. Rohan had been her first love, the kind that left marks on your heart even after it ended. She told herself she was just being friendly, that there was no harm in meeting an old flame. But the moment she saw him again, something inside her shifted. He was different now, older, sharper, with a confidence that made her pulse quicken. In a way she hadn't felt in years. That night, she had lied to Arjun for the first time. "Just meeting an old colleague," she had said, smoothing her dress before leaving. The guilt had gnawed at her, but not enough to stop her. The cafe where she met Rohan was dimly lit, intimate in a way that felt dangerous. They talked about the past, about what could have been. And then, Rohan had leaned in, his voice low. "You never stopped loving me," he murmured. "I see it in your eyes." Mira had frozen, her heart pounding. She should have pulled away. She should have left. But for one reckless second, she hesitated. That was when the door swung open. Arjun stood there, his expression unreadable. No rage, no shouting, just silence. A silence so deep it felt like a knife twisting in her chest. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes was enough to shatter her, and then, just as quietly as he had appeared, he turned and walked away. Mira had chased after him, her heels clicking against the pavement, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But by the time she made it outside, he was gone. The street was empty, the night suddenly too vast, too cold. She had returned home to an empty house, the weight of what she had done pressing down on her like a physical thing. She waited all night, jumping at every sound, praying for the chance to explain. But Arjun didn't come home. Morning came, and with it, a crushing realization. She had broken something irreparable. When Arjun finally walked through the door, his face was blank, his movements slow, deliberate. Mira had fallen to her knees, sobbing, begging him to yell at her, to hit her, to do anything but this unbearable silence. But Arjun had only looked at her, his eyes hollow. "I need time," he said softly, and then he left again. Mira sat alone in their bedroom, the walls closing in around her. She had thought the worst part would be his anger. But this quiet devastation? It was worse. She didn't know it then. But the worst was yet to come. Because when Arjun returned the next day, he didn't come with rage. He came with a suitcase, and what was inside would change everything. The hours stretched into an eternity as Mira sat on the cold marble floor of their bedroom, her back pressed against the bed they'd shared for 5 years. The silence in the house was deafening, punctuated only by the occasional tick of the antique clock Arjun had brought back from his trip to London. That clock had always annoyed her with its loud ticking, but now its rhythmic sound felt like the only thing keeping her anchored to reality. She pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them as if trying to hold herself together. The scent of Arjun's cologne still lingered faintly in the air, a cruel reminder of his presence that was no longer there. Her phone buzzed beside her, Rohan's name flashing on the screen for the 7th time that night. She ignored it again, the weight of her choices pressing down on her like a physical force. Morning light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. Mira hadn't slept at all. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the look on Arjun's face, not anger, not betrayal, but something far worse, disappointment. The kind of deep, soul-crushing disappointment that comes when someone realizes the person they loved never truly existed. The sound of the front door opening sent her heart racing. She scrambled to her feet, smoothing her crumpled clothes and wiping at her tear-streaked face. The footsteps in the hallway were slow, measured, so unlike Arjun's usual energetic stride. When he appeared in the doorway, she nearly collapsed again at the sight of him. He looked like he'd aged 10 years. Overnight. Dark circles shadowed his bloodshot eyes, and the stubble on his jaw was more pronounced than she'd ever seen it. But it was his hands that caught her attention, clenched into tight fists at his sides, the knuckles white with tension. "Arjun, please," she began, her voice cracking. "Let me explain." He held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. The simple gesture felt like a slap. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse, as if he'd been screaming all night, though she knew that wasn't his way. I'm going to stay at the apartment in Bandra for a while. The words hit her like a physical blow. That apartment was his bachelor pad, the place he'd lived before they married. He hadn't set foot there in years. How long is a while, she whispered, already dreading the answer, his shoulders lifted in the barest suggestion of a shrug. I don't know. Mira felt the walls closing in around her. This couldn't be happening. Not to them. They were the couple everyone envied, the ones who had beaten the odds. She reached for him instinctively, but he took a deliberate step back, his expression closing off completely. I need you to do something for me, he said, his tone frighteningly calm. Anything, she breathed, desperate for any chance to make things right. Stay away from him. The command was simple, but the weight behind it made her stomach churn. There was no question who him referred to. Before she could respond, Arjun turned and walked down the hallway. She followed numbly, watching as he took a single suitcase from the closet and began packing with mechanical efficiency. It was the most surreal experience of her life, watching her husband pack while she stood there helpless, like a spectator. In her own marriage. He didn't take much. A few changes of clothes. His laptop. The photo of them from their honeymoon in Bali that usually sat on his nightstand. That one hurt the most. When he zipped the suitcase closed, the finality of the sound made her flinch. He paused at the door, his back to her, shoulders tense beneath his wrinkled shirt. For one wild moment, she thought he might turn around, might say this was all a terrible mistake, but he didn't. The door clicked shut behind him with terrifying softness. No slam, no dramatic exit. Just the quiet sound of a marriage unraveling. Mira stood frozen in the foyer for what felt like hours, staring at the spot where he'd been. The house had never felt so empty. Her phone buzzed again. Rohan, of course. This time, she answered with trembling fingers. Finally, his smooth voice came through the line. I was starting to think you'd forgotten about me. The irony of his words made her want to laugh hysterically. Instead, she found herself saying, I need to see you. They met at the same cafe where everything had fallen apart. Rohan looked annoyingly perfect, his designer shirt crisp, his smile easy. He reached for her hand the moment she sat down, but she pulled away. Rough night, he asked, his smirk telling her he already knew the answer. Arjun knows, she said. Flatly. Rohan's expression didn't change. And, she repeated, incredulous. He left, Rohan. He packed a bag and left. To her shock, Rohan laughed, a rich, amused sound that made her skin crawl. Good. Now you can stop pretending you're happy playing house with Mr. Perfect. Mira stared at him, seeing him clearly for the first time in years. The charming smile that had once made her weak in the knees now looked predatory. The confident tilt of his head seemed arrogant rather than attractive. How had she never noticed the cruel edge to his beauty before? You think this is funny? She whispered. Rohan leaned forward, his voice dropping to an intimate murmur. I think you've been lying to yourself for years, Mira. You never stopped loving me. You never wanted that boring, predictable life with him. This is your chance to be happy again. The worst part was, a week ago, she might have believed him. But now, sitting across from him with her marriage in ruins, all she could think about was the way Arjun made her tea every morning exactly how she liked it. How he'd hold her hand during scary movies even though he hated them. The way he'd look at her sometimes, like she was the most fascinating person in the world. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. I made a mistake, she said, her voice stronger than she felt. Coming here today. Meeting you at all. Rohan's smile faded, replaced by something darker. You'll change your mind, he said confidently. When you realize he's never going to forgive you, you'll come crawling back to me. Mira turned and walked away, her heart pounding. She didn't know if Arjun would ever forgive her. She didn't know if their marriage could survive this. But one thing was crystal clear, Rohan was no longer part of her story. The walk home was a blur. When she finally stepped through the front door, the silence nearly crushed her. She wandered through the rooms like a ghost, seeing everything with new eyes. The photos on the walls. The little notes Arjun used to leave for her on the fridge. The sweater he'd forgotten on the back of the couch. She picked it up, pressing it to her face and inhaling deeply. The familiar scent of his cologne mixed with something uniquely Arjun made her knees give out. She slid to the floor, the sweater clutched to her chest, and finally let the tears come. What had she done? The answer came hours later, when the doorbell rang. Mira scrambled up, hope flaring in her chest. Maybe Arjun had changed his mind. Maybe he'd come home, but it wasn't Arjun. A delivery man stood holding a small package. For Mira Kapoor? He asked. She signed for it with trembling hands, staring at the plain brown box. There was no return address, but she knew. Somehow, she just knew inside. She found two things, her house key, the the one Arjun had taken with him, and a single sheet of paper with 3 words written in his familiar handwriting, "Talk to Neha." Mira's breath caught. Neha was Arjun's younger sister, the one person who knew him better than anyone. If anyone could help her understand what was happening in his mind, it was Neha, but why would Arjun want her to talk to his sister? Was this some kind of test? A cruel joke? Or was it, just maybe, a lifeline? Her fingers shook as she reached for her phone. Whatever came next, one thing was certain, her life would never be the same again. The story was far from over. The phone felt like a lead weight in Mira's hand as she stared at Neha's contact in her address book. Her thumb hovered over the call button, paralyzed by a dozen conflicting emotions. Neha had always been kind to her, but she was fiercely protective of her brother. If Arjun had told her what happened, Mira wasn't sure she could bear the judgment in those normally warm eyes. The afternoon sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the living room where Mira sat curled up on the couch. She hadn't changed clothes in 2 days, hadn't eaten more than a few bites of toast. The house smelled stale, the air thick with regret. With a deep breath that did nothing to calm her racing heart, she finally pressed call. The phone rang 4 times before Neha's familiar voice answered, sounding slightly out of breath. "Mira? Hey, I was just thinking about you." The normalcy in her tone threw Mira off balance. Did she not know? Hey Neha, she managed, her voice cracking. "Can we? I need to talk to you. In person." A pause. Then, carefully neutral, "Of course. My place in an hour?" The drive to Neha's apartment was a blur of honking horns and stoplights Mira barely registered. Her hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles ached, her mind racing through every possible scenario. When she pulled up to the modern high-rise where Neha lived, she had to sit in the car for several minutes, gathering the courage to face what came next. Neha opened the door before Mira could even knock. She looked exactly as she always did, tall and willowy like her brother, with the same sharp cheekbones and warm brown eyes. But there was something different in her expression today, a guardedness that hadn't been there before. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. "I made chai." The familiar scent of cardamom and ginger filled the apartment as Mira followed Neha to the living room. A tray with 2 steaming cups sat on the coffee table, along with a plate of biscuits. Neha must have just baked. The domestic normalcy of it all made Mira's throat tighten. They sat in silence for a long moment before Neha spoke. "Arjun came to see me last night." Mira's stomach dropped. She focused on the chai in her hands, watching the steam rise in delicate curls. "What did he tell you?" "Enough." Neha's voice was quiet but firm. "He said you've been seeing your ex. That he walked in on you 2 together." The words hung in the air between them, heavy and suffocating. Mira opened her mouth to explain, to defend herself, but what could she say? There was no version of the truth that didn't make her the villain. In this story, Neha surprised her by reaching across and taking her hand. "Look at me, Mira." When Mira finally met her eyes, she saw not anger, but something far more unsettling, understanding. "Do you love my brother?" The question hit like a punch to the chest. "Of course I do," Mira whispered, the words coming out more desperate than she intended. "Then why?" There were 100 answers Mira could have given. That Rohan had been her first love, that he'd reappeared at a vulnerable moment, that she'd been flattered by the attention. But none of those were the real truth. "I got complacent," she admitted, the realization dawning even as she spoke. "Arjun loved me so completely, so consistently, that I stopped appreciating it. I started taking him for granted." Neha studied her for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Arjun said you'd say something like that." Mira's head snapped up. "He did? He knows you better than anyone, Mira. Better than you know yourself sometimes." Neha took a sip of her chai, her expression unreadable. "He left something for you. With me." From the side table, Neha produced a small velvet box. Mira recognized it immediately. It was the jewelry box Arjun had given her on their first anniversary, the one that usually sat on her dresser at home. Her hands shook as she took it, flipping open the lid with trembling fingers. Inside wasn't jewelry, but a folded piece of paper. Mira unfolded it carefully, her breath catching when she saw Arjun's neat handwriting covering both sides of the page. Mira, if you're reading this, it means you went to Neha. That's the first step. I could list all the reasons why what you did hurt me, but you already know them. What you might not know is why I didn't scream, didn't fight, didn't do any of the things a betrayed husband is supposed to do. Because I've spent 5 years memorizing you. I know every expression that crosses your face, every hitch in your breath. I saw your guilt the moment I walked into that cafe. I saw your regret before you even registered I was there. You were already punishing yourself far more effectively than I ever could. So instead, I'm going to ask you to do something harder than facing my anger. I'm asking you to face yourself, in. This box are tickets to Kochi. Go to your grandmother's house, the one you always told me made you feel centered. Stay there for 2 weeks. No contact with me, no contact with Rohan. Just you and your thoughts, at the end of those 2 weeks. If you can look me in the eye and tell me you want our marriage, I'll be waiting at the airport with open arms, but if you can't, then we both deserve the truth, always, Arjun, tears blurred Mira's vision as she finished reading. The paper trembled in her hands, the words cutting deeper than any accusation could have. Neha was watching her carefully. The flight leaves tomorrow morning. I packed a bag for you already, figured you wouldn't be in any state to do it yourself. Mira looked up sharply. You knew about this? Of course I did. Neha's smile was sad. We Kapoors stick together. But, she hesitated. I've always thought of you as family too, Mira. Which is why I need to ask, are you going to go? The answer came without hesitation. Yes. Neha nodded, satisfied. Good. Then there's one more thing. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small key. This is for the old writing desk in your grandmother's sitting room. Arjun said you'd know the one. Mira took the key, utterly bewildered. What's in it? You'll see. Neha stood, signaling the conversation was over. I'll pick you up at 5 a.m. for your flight. Try to get some sleep tonight. The drive home passed in a haze. Mira moved through the empty house like a sleepwalker, her mind spinning. The tickets were for tomorrow, and suddenly everything was happening too fast and not fast enough all at once. She found herself standing in front of their shared closet, staring at Arjun's neatly hung shirts. Without thinking, she reached out and buried her face in one, inhaling deeply. The familiar scent of his detergent mixed with the faintest trace of his cologne made her knees weak. What if these 2 weeks were the last she ever had of him? What if she got to Kerala and realized she couldn't give him what he needed? The thought sent a bolt of panic through her so intense she had to sit down on the floor of the closet, gasping for air. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, making her jump. Rohan's name flashed on the screen again. This time, instead of ignoring it, she answered with a calm she didn't feel. Mira, finally. His voice was smooth as always. I've been calling for days. Are you ready to stop playing games? Something inside her snapped. There is no game, Rohan. There's just me realizing what a mistake it was to ever let you back into my life. His laugh was cold. You don't mean that. I do. Her voice was steadier now. And I need you to stop contacting me. For good this time. The silence on the other end stretched for so long she thought he might have hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all its charm. You'll regret this. That boring husband of yours will never forgive you, and when you come crawling back to me, I might not be waiting. The click of the call ending was the most freeing sound Mira had ever heard. She spent the rest of the evening in a daze, moving from room to room like she was seeing their home for the first time. The little cracks in the ceiling they'd always meant to fix. The stain on the kitchen counter from when Arjun had tried to make her birthday cake and failed spectacularly. The way the bedroom window caught the sunset just right in the evenings, all these little pieces of a life she might have thrown away. When she finally collapsed into their bed, exhaustion overtook her. The last thing she saw before sleep claimed her was the plane ticket on the nightstand, and the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end. Somewhere across the city, Arjun sat alone in his old apartment, staring at his phone. On the screen was a notification from his security system, the front door of their home opening and closing as Mira left for her flight. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his already messy hair. The hardest part was over. Now came the waiting point. 2 weeks. 14 days for her to decide if their marriage was worth fighting for, and for the first time since he'd walked into that cafe, Arjun allowed himself to hope. The humid Kerala air wrapped around Mira like a warm blanket as she stepped off the plane, the familiar sense of saltwater and spices immediately transporting her back to childhood summers. The Kochi airport buzzed with activity around her. Families reuniting, tourists chattering excitedly, but she moved through the crowd like a ghost, her mind still numb from the whirlwind of the past 48 hours. The taxi ride to her grandmother's house was a blur of winding roads and lush greenery. Every turn brought back memories: the old banyan tree where she'd scraped her knee at 8 years old, the tea stall where she'd bought her first cup of strong, sweet chai as a teenager, the stretch of road where she'd learned to ride a bicycle. With her grandfather running beside her, the house looked exactly as she remembered, a traditional Kerala home with sloping red-tiled roofs and wide verandas, nestled between coconut palms. The white walls had yellowed slightly with time, and the garden was wilder than it had been in her grandmother's day, but the essence of the place remained unchanged. Mira paid the driver and stood at the gate for a long moment, her suitcase beside her, breathing in the scent of jasmine from the vines climbing the front porch. The key Neha had given her felt heavy in her pocket. The caretaker, an elderly man named Rajan who had worked for her family since before she was born, emerged from the house with a wide smile. "Mira, child. You didn't tell us you were coming." His warm welcome nearly undid her. She forced a smile. It was a last-minute trip. Rajan studied her face for a moment, his smile fading slightly. Well, the house is ready for you. I'll bring your bags inside." The interior was cool and dim, the wooden floors polished to a shine. Mira wandered through the rooms like she was seeing them for the first time, the formal sitting room with its stiff-backed chairs, the kitchen that still smelled faintly of decades of spices ground into the mortar, the hallway lined with black and white. Photos of relatives she barely remembered. Her grandmother's bedroom, where she would be staying, was exactly as it had been when the old woman was alive. The four-poster bed with its mosquito netting, the heavy wooden dresser with its tarnished mirror, the ceiling fan that creaked when it turned. Mira set her bag down and sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She had come here to find clarity, to decide the fate of her marriage, but now that she was here, all she felt was exhaustion. She lay back on the bed, staring up at the slow-turning fan, and let the tears come. 3 days passed in a haze. Mira slept more than she had in years, the oppressive heat and the rhythmic sound of the ocean lulling her into a near-constant state of drowsiness. She ate when Rajan insisted, wandered the beach at sunset, and otherwise avoided thinking about anything important. On the fourth morning, she woke with a start, the dream still vivid in her mind, Arjun standing at the end of a long hallway. His back turned to her. No matter how fast she ran toward him, the house was quiet except for the distant sound of Rajan puttering in the garden. Mira sat up, rubbing her eyes, and for the first time since arriving, she felt something other than numbness, restlessness. She showered and dressed mechanically, then found herself standing in front of the old writing desk in the sitting room. It was an antique piece, carved from dark rosewood, that had always been her grandmother's prized possession. As children, she and her cousins had been strictly forbidden from touching it. The key Neha had given her fit perfectly into the small, ornate lock. Inside the desk were several compartments, all empty except for one, a shallow drawer at the back containing a single, leather-bound journal. Mira's hands trembled as she lifted it out, recognizing her grandmother's handwriting on the cover. For Mira, when she's ready. Her breath caught. She had no memory of her grandmother ever mentioning this journal. Settling into one of the stiff armchairs, Mira opened the book to the first page. The date at the top was from just a few months before her grandmother's death. My dearest Mira, if you're reading this, it means you've come back to this house seeking answers. I always knew you would, one day. There's something about this place that calls to our family when we're at our lowest, isn't there? I won't pretend to know what troubles have brought you here, but I can guess they involve matters of the heart. You've always felt things so deeply, just like your mother did at your age. Mira had to stop reading, her vision blurring with tears. Her grandmother had died when she was in college, long before she'd met Arjun, before her career had taken off, before any of the choices that had led her to this moment. And yet, the words felt eerily prescient. She read late into the afternoon, pausing only when Rajan brought her lunch and a pot of tea. The journal wasn't a diary in the traditional sense, it was more a collection of thoughts, lessons, and stories her grandmother had wanted to pass down. Tales of her own youthful mistakes, of love found and lost, of the resilience of their family through generations of hardship. One passage in particular made Mira's breath catch. We women of this family have a terrible habit, Mira, we chase after shiny things while ignoring the treasures right in front of us. Your great-aunt Lakshmi left a good man for a charming scoundrel and regretted it until the day she died. Your own mother nearly made the same mistake, if not for your father's stubborn love. Remember this, real love isn't flashy. It doesn't sweep you off your feet with grand gestures. Real love is quiet. It's the hand that steadies you when you stumble, the voice that tells you the truth even when you don't want to hear it, the presence that remains even when you least deserve it. Mira closed the journal gently, her chest aching. She thought of Arjun's steady hands, his quiet strength, the way he'd always seemed to know what she needed before she did, and she thought of Rohan, all charm and passion with no substance. Beneath, the realization hit her like a physical blow. She'd been repeating her family's oldest mistake. Evening found her on the beach, the journal tucked under her arm, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. The ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and seaweed, mingling with the smoke from nearby cooking fires. For the first time in weeks, her mind felt clear. She knew what she needed to do. Back at the house, she dug through her suitcase until she found the notebook she'd packed, half hoping she'd find time to sketch designs while away. Instead, she began to write, page after page filled with her messy scrawl, apologies, explanations, promises. All the things she should have said to Arjun before it was too late. When she finally set the pen down, her hand cramped and her eyes Burning from lack of sleep, dawn was breaking over the coconut trees. Birds chirped outside her window, and the distant sound of fishing boats heading out to sea drifted through the morning air. Mira carefully tore out the pages and folded them, placing them inside an envelope she found in the writing desk. She addressed it simply, Arjun. Rajan found her on the veranda, the envelope in her lap, staring out at the garden. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he remarked, setting down a cup of steaming chai beside her. Mira smiled faintly. "No. Just my own foolishness." She handed him the envelope. "Can you make sure this gets posted today?" Rajan examined the address. "To your husband?" She nodded, her throat tight. "It's important." As Rajan walked away with the letter, Mira sipped her chai and watched the sunlight filter through the trees. She still had 10 days left of her self-imposed exile, but for the first time since arriving, she felt like she might be able to breathe again. Somewhere far away, Arjun sat at his temporary desk in the Bandra apartment, staring at his phone. No calls, no messages. Just silence. He ran a hand over his face, the stubble rough against his palm. This was what he'd wanted, wasn't it? Time apart. Space for her to think. Then why did every passing hour feel like a knife twisting in his chest? His phone buzzed, making his heart leap, but it was just Neha checking in. He typed a quick reply, trying to ignore the crushing disappointment. 2 weeks. He could survive 2 weeks. At least, that's what he kept telling himself. Little did he know, halfway across the country, a letter was beginning its journey to him, one that would change everything. The letter took 5 excruciating days to reach Arjun. 5 days during which Mira wandered the beaches and backroads of Kochi like a restless spirit, her mind swinging wildly between certainty and doubt. Had she said enough in that letter? Had she said too much? Would Arjun even read it, or would he take one look at her handwriting and toss it aside? Meanwhile, in Mumbai, Arjun was going through his own private hell. He'd thrown himself into work, taking on extra projects just to fill the endless hours. His temporary apartment was spotless, not because he was neat, but because he couldn't sit still long enough to make a mess. Every night, he lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment in the cafe over and over, wondering if there had been signs he'd missed, things he could have done differently. The morning the letter arrived, he was elbow deep in financial reports, trying and failing to focus. The doorbell rang, startling him from his thoughts. "Registered post for Arjun Kapoor," the delivery man said, holding out a clipboard for him to sign. Arjun frowned as he took the slim envelope. The return address, Kochi, made his heart stutter. He shut the door slowly, staring at the familiar handwriting spelling out his name. For a long moment, he just stood there, holding it. This was what he'd wanted, wasn't it? Her honest thoughts. Her decision. Now that it was here in his hands, he wasn't sure he was ready. He set the envelope carefully on the kitchen counter and made himself a cup of coffee he didn't want. Showered. Checked emails. Anything to delay the moment of truth. Finally, when he could avoid it no longer, he picked up the letter and slid a finger under the flap. The pages inside were slightly crumpled, covered in Mira's messy scrawl, the handwriting of someone who'd written in a hurry, emotions pouring out faster than her hand could move. Arjun, I don't know how to start this letter, so I'll just say the thing that matters most. I'm sorry. Not just for what happened with Rohan, but for everything leading up to it. For taking you for granted. For forgetting how lucky I was. For not seeing what was right in front of me until it was almost gone. Being back in my grandmother's house has made me realize some hard truths. Chief among them, I've been repeating my family's oldest mistake. My grandmother wrote about it in her journal, which I only just found, thanks to you. Generation after generation of women in my family chasing after shiny, exciting things while ignoring the quiet, steady love that was always there waiting for us. You've always been my steady love, Arjun. Even when I didn't deserve it. I could fill pages explaining what happened with Rohan, but the truth is simple, I was weak. He reappeared at a moment when I was feeling insecure about turning 30, about my career stalling, about us falling into routines that suddenly felt suffocating instead of comforting. And instead of talking to you about any of it, I let myself be flattered by his attention. That night at the cafe, nothing physical happened. But that's no excuse. I betrayed you in my heart long before that moment, by even entertaining his advances, by keeping secrets from you. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed you to know that this time apart has made one thing crystal clear. I want our marriage. Not because I'm afraid of being alone, not out of guilt or obligation, but because you're the best thing that's ever happened to me. The thought of losing you has shown me what real loss feels like. I'll be at the airport on the 17th, just like you asked. Whether you're there or not, I'll understand. Yours, always. Mira. Arjun read the letter 3 times, his hands growing steadier with each pass. Then he carefully folded the pages and slipped them back into the envelope, his mind racing. The 17th. 5 days from now. He should have felt relieved. This was the answer he'd hoped for, wasn't it? And yet, a knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Neha let herself in before he could answer, carrying 2 takeout bags that smelled of butter chicken and garlic naan. "You look like hell," she observed, setting the food on the counter. Her gaze landed on the envelope. "Ah, you heard from her?" Arjun nodded, sliding into a stool at the kitchen island. "She's coming back on the 17th, says she wants to make things work." Neha dished out the food with practiced efficiency. And what? And do you believe her?" Neha fixed him with that sharp older sister look that had always seen straight through him. Arjun pushed his food around the plate. "I don't know." The admission surprised even him. All this time, he'd been so focused on whether Mira would choose him, he hadn't stopped to ask himself if he could truly move past what had happened. Neha sighed. "Look, I'm not going to tell you what to do. But ask yourself this, can you live with it? Not just now, when the wound is fresh, but 5 years. From now? 10? Will you be able to look at her and not see this moment?" Arjun had no answer. That night, he lay awake again, but this time his mind wasn't replaying the betrayal, it was sifting through 5 years of memories. Mira laughing at his terrible jokes. Mira crying in his arms when her design studio almost went under. Mira sleeping curled against him, her breath warm on his neck. Could he really walk away from all that? More importantly, could he stay without resentment poisoning what they had? Morning found him no closer to an answer. He dressed mechanically and headed to the office, hoping work would provide distraction. It didn't. By lunchtime, he'd rewritten the same email 4 times without sending it. His assistant, Priya, finally took pity on him. "Sir, maybe you should go home. You've been not yourself lately." Arjun rubbed his eyes. "That obvious?" Priya hesitated. "You've been staring at the same spreadsheet for 40 minutes. And you're wearing 2 different socks." He looked down. Sure enough, 1 black dress sock, 1 navy blue. That was the final straw. He grabbed his jacket and headed out, not even sure where he was going until he found himself outside Rohan's office building. It was a stupid idea. Arjun knew that even as he walked through the gleaming lobby, even as he gave his name to the receptionist. But some part of him needed to look this man in the eye, to understand what had almost cost him his marriage. Rohan appeared in the waiting area a few minutes later, looking every inch the successful investment banker, tailored suit, perfect hair, confident smirk. The smirk faltered slightly when he saw Arjun. "Kapoor. This is unexpected." Arjun kept his voice low. 5 minutes. That's all I need." Rohan studied him for a long moment before nodding toward a small conference room. Once the door closed behind them, Arjun got straight to the point. "Why? Her?" Rohan blinked. "Excuse me? Mira. Why her? You could have any woman in this city. Why go after my wife?" For the first time, Rohan's polished facade cracked slightly. He sank into one of the chairs, running a hand through his hair. "Honestly? I don't know. Nostalgia, maybe. We had history. History from 10 years ago." Rohan met his gaze then, and to Arjun's surprise, there was no malice there, just something uncomfortably close to regret. "Look, I'm not proud of what happened. Mira and we were kids when we dated. I think I wanted to prove to myself that what we had was real. Turns out it wasn't." Arjun hadn't expected honesty. It threw him off balance. "She told you it was over?" "Not in so many words. But the way she looked at me that last time." Rohan shook his head. "She loves you, man. Even when she was with me, it was you she was thinking about." The words should have been comforting. Instead, they made Arjun's chest ache. He left without another word, the encounter leaving him more unsettled than before. Back at his apartment, he poured himself a drink he didn't really want and stood at the window, watching the city lights come on one by one. 3 days until the 17th. 3 days to decide if he could truly forgive. Somewhere over the Arabian Sea, Mira's plane was winging its way back to him, and he still didn't know if he'd be there to meet it. The morning of the 17th dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of Mumbai weather that made everything feel slightly unreal. Arjun had barely slept, his mind churning through the same questions on an endless loop. He stood in front of his closet, staring at his clothes as if they held some hidden answer. What did one wear to potentially save, or end, a marriage? He settled on dark jeans and a navy button-down, the same outfit he'd worn on their first real date all those years ago. The drive to the airport was a blur of honking horns and rain-slicked streets. His hands clenched the steering wheel so tightly. His knuckles ached. Every traffic light felt like the universe testing him, every slowdown a cruel joke. When he finally pulled into the airport parking garage, he sat in the car for a long moment, his breath coming too fast. This was it. In less than an hour, Mira's plane would land, and he'd have to decide, be waiting at the arrival's gate with open arms, or not show up at all, letting his absence speak for him. His phone buzzed with a text from Neha, "Whatever you decide, I'm with you." Arjun took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. Inside the terminal, the arrivals board showed Mira's flight was on time, landing in 40 minutes. He positioned himself near the gate, far enough back that she wouldn't spot him immediately. Giving himself one last chance to change his mind. Around him, families and drivers holding name signs milled about, the buzz of reunions and business trips filling the air. A little girl in a pink dress bounced excitedly next to her father, holding a handmade, "Welcome home mommy" sign. The normalcy of it all felt surreal. Then the announcement came, Flight 642 from Kochi had landed. Arjun's pulse kicked up, his mouth going dry. He wiped his sweaty palms on his jeans and forced himself to breathe. Passengers began trickling through the gate, businessmen with rolling suitcases, families with sleepy children, backpackers with tan skin. And then, Mira, she looked different. Not just the Kerala tan or the loose cotton dress she wore instead of her usual designer clothes, but something in the way she carried herself. Less guarded, more present. Her eyes scanned the crowd anxiously. Hope and fear warring on her face. Arjun's feet moved before his brain could stop them. She spotted him when he was still 20 feet away. Her whole body went still, her suitcase forgotten beside her. For one endless moment, they just looked at each other across the crowded terminal, the noise around them fading to a dull roar. Then Mira was moving, half running, her sandals slapping against the tile. Arjun met her halfway, catching her as she threw her arms around his neck, her whole body shaking. "You came," she whispered against his shoulder, her voice breaking. Arjun buried his face in her hair, breathing in the familiar scent of her shampoo mixed with salt air. He didn't trust himself to speak, so he just held on tighter, his own eyes burning. When they finally pulled apart, Mira's cheeks were wet. She started to say something, but Arjun gently touched a finger to her lips. "Not here," he said softly. "Let's go home." The drive back was quiet, the rain pattering against the windshield the only sound. Mira sat with her hands folded in her lap, stealing glances at him when she thought he wasn't looking. Arjun kept both hands on the wheel, his grip tight. Their house looked exactly as Mira had left it, but felt completely different. She hovered in the foyer, suddenly unsure of her place here. Arjun took her suitcase and set it by the stairs. "You hungry? I could make." Arjun. Mira's voice was firm now. "We need to talk." He nodded slowly, leading her to the living room. They sat on opposite ends of the couch, the space between them feeling vast. Mira spoke first. "I meant every word in that letter. I know. And I understand if you can't, Mira." Arjun took a deep breath. "I need you to listen, okay? No interrupting." She nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. Arjun leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "When I walked into that cafe and saw you with him, my first thought wasn't anger. It was fear. Fear that I'd already lost you, that I'd been losing you for a while and was too stupid to see it." Mira opened her mouth to protest, but remembered her promise and stayed silent. "That fear made me realize something," Arjun continued. "I'd gotten complacent too. I stopped courting you, stopped putting in the work because I assumed we were past all that. But marriage isn't something you win and then get to stop trying at." A tear slipped down Mira's cheek. "Here's the thing," Arjun said, his voice rough. "I forgive you. Not because it doesn't hurt, but because I believe you when you say it was a mistake. And because I know who you are at your core, the woman who stayed up with me for 3 nights straight when I was starting the company, who remembers how I take my coffee even when I forget, who laughs at my terrible jokes even when she's heard them 100 times. Mira was full on crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "But," Arjun held up a finger, "forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. If we do this, we do it right. Counseling. Hard conversations. Total honesty, even when it sucks. No more secrets, no matter how small." Mira nodded eagerly. "Yes. Anything. And Rohan, out of my life for good," she said firmly. "I blocked him everywhere. Changed my number. If he shows up at my office, security has instructions." Arjun studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay. Okay?" Mira whispered. "Okay." She launched herself across the couch, wrapping her arms around him so tightly he grunted. Arjun held her just as tightly, his face buried in her neck. Breathing her in, they stayed like that for a long time, the rain tapping against the windows, the house silent except for their breathing. Later, after they'd ordered takeout and eaten, curled up together on the couch, after they'd talked until their voices grew hoarse. After they'd gone upstairs and fallen into bed exhausted but together, really together for the first time in months, Mira lay awake listening to Arjun's steady breathing. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, took time to rebuild. But as she turned to watch her husband sleep, his face relaxed in the dim light, she knew one thing for certain: they'd make it, not because it would be simple, but because they'd fight for it. Every single day, and that, she realized as sleep finally claimed her, was what real love looked like. The first light of dawn painted their bedroom in pale gold as Mira stirred awake, her body instinctively curling closer to Arjun's warmth. For a blissful moment, she forgot everything: the betrayal, the separation, the painful journey back to each other. There was only this: the steady rhythm of his breathing, the familiar weight of his arm draped over her waist, the scent of his skin that no expensive cologne could ever replicate. Then memory came rushing back, and her eyes flew open. Arjun was already awake, watching her with an unreadable expression. They lay there silently, the space between them charged with all the things left unsaid. His fingers traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder, sending shivers down her spine despite the morning heat. "Did you sleep?" he finally asked, his voice rough with sleep. "Some." She caught his wandering hand, lacing their fingers together. "You?" He shook his head, his dark eyes shadowed. "Kept thinking I'd wake up and this would all be a dream." The raw honesty in his voice made her throat tighten. She brought their joined hands to her lips, pressing a kiss to his knuckles. "I'm here. This is real." His thumb brushed her lower lip, his gaze intense. "Prove it." The challenge hung between them, loaded with meaning. Mira understood what he was really asking, not for physical proof, but for the emotional vulnerability they'd both been avoiding. She took a deep breath and rolled onto her back, staring at the ceiling fan spinning lazy circles above them. "I thought about leaving you," she admitted softly. "That first night in Kochi, when the guilt felt like it might actually kill me. I thought about packing my things and disappearing somewhere you'd never find me." Arjun went completely still beside her. "Not because I didn't love you," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "But because I thought you'd be better off without me." She turned her head to meet his gaze. "Then I found my grandmother's journal, and I realized running away would just be another betrayal. You deserved the truth. You deserved a choice." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything she'd just confessed. Finally, Arjun exhaled sharply and pulled her against his chest, his arms wrapping around her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Don't you ever," he growled into her hair, "think that way again. There is no version of my life that's better without you in it. Broken trust we can fix. Distance we can bridge. But losing you completely?" His voice broke. "That would destroy me." Mira clung to him, her tears soaking into his t-shirt. All the words she wanted to say stuck in her throat, so she showed him instead, her lips finding his in a kiss that tasted like salt and promises and second chances. The morning passed in a haze of quiet intimacy. They made breakfast together, moving around each other in the kitchen with the easy familiarity of years of shared meals. But there were new rhythms too, lingering touches, stolen glances, the way Arjun would pause mid-sentence just to look at her, as if memorizing her all over again. It wasn't until they were clearing the dishes that the outside world intruded in the form of Mira's buzzing phone. She glanced at the screen and froze. Arjun noticed immediately. "What is it?" She turned the phone to show him a notification from her studio. The spring collection preview had been moved up to next week. "I completely forgot," she groaned. With everything that happened, Arjun took the phone from her trembling hands and set it aside. "Hey, look at me." He waited until she met his gaze. "We'll figure it out together." The simple assurance steadied her. She nodded, squaring her shoulders. "I need to go into the studio. There's so much to do. I'll drive you." The offer surprised her. Normally, they kept their work lives separate, respecting each other's professional spaces. But nothing about their relationship was normal right now, and the thought of spending the day apart after everything felt unbearable. Her studio was exactly as she'd left it 3 weeks ago, fabric swatches pinned to mood boards, half-finished sketches scattered across her drafting table, the faint scent of coffee and fabric dye lingering in the air. Her assistant, Priya, nearly dropped her armload of samples when she saw Mira walk in. "Mira, we weren't expecting you back until..." Priya's eyes flicked to Arjun hovering protectively behind her, then back to Mira's face. "Is everything okay?" Mira forced a smile. "Just ready to get back to work." "What's the status on the spring samples?" As Priya launched into updates, Mira felt Arjun's hand brush the small of her back, a silent show of support before he retreated to the seating area by the windows, giving her space to work. She threw herself into the flurry of preparations, grateful for the distraction, but the peace didn't last. Around midday, as Mira was reviewing fabric orders with her production manager, a familiar voice cut through the studio chatter. Well, look who's back." Mira's blood ran cold. She turned slowly to find Rohan leaning against her office doorway, looking infuriatingly handsome in a tailored navy suit. Her entire body went rigid. "How did you get in here?" she demanded. Rohan flashed that charming smile that had once made her weak in the knees. Your receptionist still likes me. His gaze slid past her to where Arjun had risen from his chair, his expression thunderous. Ah. The husband makes an appearance. How domestic. Mira didn't have time to react before Arjun was across the room, positioning himself between her and Rohan. You need to leave, he said, his voice dangerously calm. Rohan held up his hands in mock surrender. Easy there. I just came to return something Mira left at my place. He pulled a familiar silk scarf from his pocket, one Mira had thought lost months ago. Though given the circumstances, maybe you should keep it as a souvenir. Arjun moved so fast Mira barely registered it. One moment Rohan was smirking, the next he was pinned against the wall with Arjun's forearm pressed to his throat. Arjun. Mira grabbed his arm, but he didn't budge. You listen to me, Arjun growled, his face inches from Rohan's. You ever come near my wife again, ever call, ever text, ever so much as think her name, I will ruin you. That investment firm you're so proud of? I know people on the board. That penthouse in Bandra? The developer owes me favors. He tightened his grip. Are we clear? Rohan's face had gone pale. He gave a jerky nod. Arjun released him with a shove. Get out. As Rohan straightened his ruined suit and slunk away, the entire studio staff stood frozen, staring at the scene. Mira's cheeks burned with humiliation, but stronger than that was an overwhelming surge of love for the man beside her. Arjun turned to her, his anger fading into concern. You okay? She nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. He glanced around at their stunned audience. Maybe we should, everyone, Mira interrupted, finding her voice. Take an early lunch. We'll reconvene at 2. As the staff filed out, murmuring amongst themselves, Mira pulled Arjun into her office and shut the door. For a long moment, they just looked at each other, then Arjun ran a hand through his hair, his shoulders slumping. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have lost my temper like that in front of your team. Mira crossed the space between them in 2 strides, grabbing his face and kissing him fiercely. When she finally pulled back, they were both breathless. That, she said, was the hottest thing I've ever seen. Arjun blinked, then burst out laughing, the tension draining from his body. Well, in that case. He kissed her again, slower this time, his hands settling on her waist. Seriously though, he murmured against her lips, are you okay? Mira rested her forehead against his. Better than okay. Seeing him, it just confirmed what I already knew. He means nothing to me. You're my everything. Arjun's arms tightened around her. Good. Because I'm not going anywhere. They stood like that for a long time, wrapped in each other, the outside world temporarily held at bay. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, there would still be difficult conversations, moments of doubt, the slow work of rebuilding trust. But in that moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was this: they were together. And for now, that was enough. The spring collection show was a blur of lights, music, and adrenaline. Mira stood backstage, watching her designs come to life on the runway, the audience's appreciative murmurs washing over her like a balm. Months of work culminated in this moment: the delicate lace dresses, the structured jackets with unexpected cutouts, the bold prints that had kept her awake for weeks perfecting, but her eyes kept drifting to one person in the front row. Arjun sat with his elbows resting on his knees, his gaze fixed intently on each model as they passed. He didn't fidget with his phone like the other attendees, didn't engage in the idle chatter around him. He watched, completely present, as if nothing in the world mattered more than seeing her vision realized. When the final look, a breathtaking ivory gown with intricate beadwork, made its way down the runway, the crowd erupted in applause. Mira took her bow, her heart pounding, the spotlight warm on her skin. As she straightened, her eyes immediately found Arjun's. He was on his feet, clapping harder than anyone, his proud smile visible even from the distance. Backstage after the show, surrounded by champagne flutes and congratulatory hugs, Mira felt a familiar hand slip into hers. She turned to find Arjun smiling down at her, his dark eyes shining. You were incredible, he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. She leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent. I couldn't have done it without you. The after-party was a whirlwind of industry, chatter and flashing cameras. Mira played the part of gracious designer, accepting compliments and networking effortlessly, but her attention kept returning to Arjun. He stood by the bar, deep in conversation with her production manager, looking completely at ease despite being surrounded by fashion elites. At one point, she caught him watching her from across the room, his expression soft with something that made her stomach flutter. He raised his glass slightly in a silent toast, and she mirrored the gesture. A private moment in the crowded room. They left the party early, both exhausted but buzzing with residual energy. The car ride home was quiet, Mira's head resting against the window as the city lights streaked by. You're quiet, Arjun observed, Glancing at her, she smiled faintly. Just thinking. About? How lucky I am. Arjun reached across the console to squeeze her hand. Their house was dark when they arrived. The familiar creak of the front door welcoming them home. Mira kicked off her heels with a relieved sigh, padding barefoot into the kitchen for water. Arjun followed, loosening his tie. You should be celebrating. That show was a triumph. It was, she agreed, leaning against the counter. But the best part was looking out and seeing you there. He crossed the space between them, caging her against the counter with his arms. Always. The kiss started slow, a gentle press of lips, but quickly deepened. Mira fisted her hands in his shirt, pulling him closer, the events of the evening fading to background noise. Arjun broke away first, resting his forehead against hers. I have something for you. She raised an eyebrow. Oh? He took her hand, leading her to the living room where a small gift box sat on the coffee table. Mira shot him a curious look before picking it up. Inside was a delicate silver key pendant on a thin chain. It's for the writing desk in Kochi, Arjun explained softly. So you'll always have access to your grandmother's wisdom when you need it. Mira's vision blurred with tears. She clutched the necklace to her chest, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Help me put it on? Arjun fastened the clasp with gentle fingers, his breath warm against her neck. When he was done, she turned to face him, the pendant cool against her skin. I have something for you too, she whispered. From her clutch, she pulled out a folded piece of paper. Arjun opened it carefully, his brow furrowing as he read *, certificate of adoption, reserved. Name, Leo. Breed, golden retriever. Available for pickup next week. *, he looked up, stunned. A dog? Mira bit her lip. You've always wanted one. And I thought, maybe it's time we started a new chapter. Together. Arjun's face did something complicated before he pulled her into a fierce hug. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. I love you. I love you too. Later, as they lay tangled together in bed, Mira traced idle patterns on Arjun's chest, the events of the past months playing through her mind like a film reel. The betrayal. The heartbreak. The slow, painful journey back to each other. You're thinking loud, Arjun murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. Do you think we'll ever stop being afraid? Afraid of what? That one day we'll wake up and this will all have been a dream. Arjun cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. No, he said honestly. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. The fear keeps us from taking each other for granted again. Mira considered this, then nodded. He was right. The scars would remain, but they were proof of healing, of survival. She settled back against him, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. Outside, the first light of dawn painted the sky in pale pinks and golds. A new day. A fresh start, and this time, they wouldn't waste it.